Let's talk about Jill Stein a little bit. Most people who are watching this program or listening to this program regularly know that I am not a big fan of Jill Stein. They know that I've been super critical of Jill Stein. She is way out there on science-related stuff. She has what I consider a completely silly position on Israel. I don't believe she is remotely qualified to be president of the United States. But when I see an unfair critique, I have to point it out. And there is a really, really ridiculous critique of Jill Stein that surfaced over the last few days. The Daily Beast put out an article saying, hey guys, Jill Stein rails against companies that harm the environment and big pharma. She rails against defense contractors and Wall Street, but she's investing in those companies. And I thought, okay, this could be interesting. Let's take a look at it. And I looked into it, and it turns out that Jill Stein invests in index funds, which hold hundreds or sometimes thousands of companies in their portfolio. They follow large groups of the economy, sometimes as big as the entire economy. So what's the big critique? Well, for example, Jill Stein has somewhere between $1 and $2 million invested in mutual funds like the Vanguard 500 fund. I've spoken about this before. I have money invested in that fund. This is one of, if not the most, one of the most heavily invested funds through Vanguard, which I've said many times I use because it has really, really low management fees. Sometimes hedge funds will charge 1, 2, even 3% a year, right? These Vanguard funds charge between 0.05 and 0.2%. And all it does is track the S&P 500. Now, by virtue of that, there's going to be all sorts of companies included in that because those companies are part of the economy. Stein has invested somewhere between $1 and $2.5 million in funds like the TIAA-CREF Equity Index, which holds investments in stocks like JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, the ones that she really heavily opposes on Wall Street. It's a really broad fund managed by TIAA-CREF, which runs retirement accounts for people that work in academia or research or medical and cultural fields. I've spoken about this many times. I don't think that investing in individual stocks is particularly wise over the long term. Very few people will actually do better than the market averages. And over the very long term, there are very few hedge fund managers and expensive money managers that will actually beat the market averages. The most prudent way to invest is in the broadest base of stocks possible over the longest possible period of time at the lowest possible cost. And that Vanguard 500 fund, they also have one that is called the Total Stock Market Index Fund, which basically invests in the entire United States stock market, all stocks. Their fees are super cheap. If anything, Pat, and you know I'm not a fan of Jill Stein, this improves my opinion of her, that instead of falling prey to expensive money managers or hedge funds, she knows, or at least she's doing what indicates that she knows, that the most prudent way to invest is in these super low cost, broad funds. She's not directly investing in or supporting Exxon any more than I am by holding this fund. I think this is a totally bogus critique of Jill Stein.
Right, and the truth is about 50 million Americans have investments in mutual funds and index funds.
Do
And
they all
too
love
because-
ExxonMobil?
Oh, no, of course not. You have no say in how the money's managed.
Yeah.
And also, the Daily Beast is run by IAC Interactive Corp. They did a whole hit piece on her as sort of a conflict of interest story.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, on the board of that company is Chelsea Clinton.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, of course, people would probably would be less surprised that the Clintons are invested in many of these funds. And I guess the idea is look at what Jill Stein says and look at what she does. As Pat said, 50 million Americans are invested in these funds. Very often, you don't even have a choice. If you want a retirement account at all from your work and you want them to do matching, for example, you might get to choose between 4 or 5 funds, all of which to some degree invest in these companies. Completely bogus smear attempt. And the saddest part is it's not just the Daily Beast, which, as Pat pointed out, has some interesting ownership ties. Some left-wing blogs have also fallen for this, supposed progressive blogs. There is plenty to critique about Jill Stein that you don't need to go into. She's against oil companies but owns index funds. It is a totally flaccid and ridiculous critique, and I wish the left wouldn't fall for it.